Of this meeting. My name is Marco from Global Project, which is a network of social centers and occupied spaces around Italy. Specifically, I'm coming from Venice, from a self-managed space called Sale Dogs. Well, I think that starting from listening the first speeches here, there is something which is quite positive. The fact that I think that is common language that we are trying to build also through this type of meetings is probably less difficult to build now than like 30 years ago. I think we, of course with different nuances, but many of the speeches basically focused on some important points that must be developed in the future, in the next workshops. For example, this necessity of both the constituent and constituent process in building a true and effective European political space for strategies. So I also think, without repeating, that I agree with like 95% of the things that I've heard before, but I also hope that this day will be used in order to build a European agenda. So, of course, the confrontation on the content, but also how to do this. How we basically make one step more from a common discussion to a common action, from networking to net struggling across Europe. There are, I think, several appointments of action in the European agenda. Let's discuss about this possible days of common actions, and let's discuss maybe if we need to create more. I think we don't have time to lose, especially exactly because also Raul pointed out that we are sitting on a time bomb. So I don't know if we have to hope that it is not exploding, or we do have to accelerate the explosion of this time bomb. I mean, so. Another thing, just really briefly, I think that this morning probably some of you found on his or her chair this very 1.0 leaflet, this kind of old-style paper. I apologize for the old-style paper, but you can find this collective reflection about Europe also on the website globalproject.info, both in Italian and English. And I want just to really briefly put on the table some issues that you can find more completely in this paper here that, of course, must be developed, I think, in the discussion of the next day. So, of course, let's be clear. The general austerity framework is not changed. But I think there is a change in the last phase of Europe in how this strategy of austerity has been applied. Maybe the German comrade could say I'm wrong, but for example, if you observe what came out from the last German election, you really see like the German government is trying also not only to impose austerity, but also to give some new welfare measures at home, you know, for unemployed, for families, etc. Also a sort of hype over this environmental sustainable development, the refusal to use nuclear energy, for example. So, in a way, I think that in the at least middle term, as European movements, we will have to face a change in the strategy of the imposition of the austerity Europe-wide. The change of rhetoric from a rhetoric of sacrifice to a rhetoric of competitiveness. I don't know if I'm saying it right in English. Which will be probably not probably, for sure will be the issue of the next European Council in mid-December. So it's not about doing more sacrifices, but how do we become more competitive? That will also mean, of course, further precarization of the labor force in Europe will mean, further privatization of the commons on the national level. So how do we face, starting from our political practice, this change in this strategy of austerity? I agree with you. This is, okay, Europe is Europe and it's Euro-Mediterranean. I think that you're right, we cannot speak for persons who are not here, but I think that we must take into account, and all of us agree, that building a Europe of social movements cannot stay without taking into account what happened in Northern Africa, etc., the Euro-Mediterranean movements. This is especially for the narration, especially for building a new temporality in European space. We need to stay in touch with the struggles and to organize with the struggles, even if it's difficult. Last thing that I would like to mention, that after the tragedy of Lampedusa, also the European policies on migration will slightly change, and they will change not because of a humanitarian turn of the European Union, and not even because the forces of representative European policies are fearing this rise in populism, for example, the Front National in France, etc. But because they will use the tragedy of Lampedusa to modify the policies of the access of the migrant labor force in Europe. So we also have to take into account, when speaking about migrants and when speaking from a more global perspective than about building struggles, that this will be another thing that we will have to counteract. Of course, avoiding the fact that populism take more ground in Europe. That's it.